So we have 20 minutes or so to describe and solve the housing crisis here in Massachusetts. Can we do it? A few weeks ago, the Healey administration announced changes to the state's home buying program that expanded access to $25,000 loans for certain first-time home buyers and made them interest-free. Those changes are part of a $25 million investment announced earlier this year. Still, it's not totally clear how much these efforts do or will help ease the much-talked-about housing crisis here in Massachusetts. Today, we're going to explore the gap between those who want to buy a home and those who can afford to or can find one at their price range, and why it seems to be so stubbornly massive here in Massachusetts. With us to help are two guests. Jesse Kanson-Benanav is the executive director of Abundant Housing Massachusetts, and Jennifer Smith is a senior reporter for CommonWealth Beacon. Jesse and Jennifer, welcome to the Curiosity Desk.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we have 20 minutes or so to describe and solve the housing crisis here in Massachusetts. Can we do it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so.
Rock on.
You two are both insane. Let's start before we talk about some of the sort of broader issues. Can we talk a little bit about some of those changes that the Maura Healey administration has brought to bear in recent weeks? What exactly is happening? How is it different from what has been happening?
So a lot of the efforts that we've been seeing have been basically trying to take aim at the access problem. Basically, if you have a certain amount of money, you might be able to, even in the absolute cutthroat, elbows-throwing world of Massachusetts housing, you might be able to kind of narrow your way into buying a house. But for basically everyone else, you're going to need some level of help. And so there have been a number of programs that are oriented around helping people who are either first-time home buyers and or also kind of at a lower income level access the capital that they need to kind of get them over that hurdle. So a number of these changes have basically been saying, well, we're going to make these available at a wider range of potential housing applicants. We're going to keep that oriented at first-time home buyers who have been maybe stuck in the rental markets longer than they'd like to. And so it really is kind of that threshold question that they're working to address, and it's part of a long-time effort to, again, get people just over that sort of starting point.
Jesse, that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
So let's start there and then ask the sort of the financial access question. Is that the major barrier to first-time home buyers? Is it as simple as it is just the money issue, or is there more at play here?
I would say there's certainly more at play. The money issue is a part of it, but the money issue is symptomatic, I think, of where we are in terms of the availability of homes for people to purchase, really wherever they are on the income spectrum. Certainly, working class folks, middle income folks really struggling to afford here because there aren't enough homes for them to purchase. I was really glad to hear Jennifer use the word cutthroat, because I think that means I've done my job when I talk to the press of my talking points. There is cutthroat competition for housing.
Why? Just is it a simple supply and demand thing? Is it cutthroat because there's just not enough for the number of people who want to buy homes?
Absolutely. That's absolutely the case. We've severely underbuilt housing for generations now in Massachusetts. Home ownership and rental housing, we are hundreds of thousands of homes short of where we need to be in the next decade or so just to meet the level of demand. When that drives that kind of cutthroat competition, in that situation, wealthier folks will always outbid and drive up the price of homes against more working class folks who are trying to afford it.
Well, I also love, Jesse, talking points or no, I myself was trying to find a place back in the grand old year of 2016, 2015, a much friendlier housing environment. And when I tell you the condo that we were looking at and ultimately, through some handwritten letters or whatever, did manage to close on, it was only on the market for 2 days, and that was a decade ago. It is still bad, but it has been bad for a while.
Absolutely.
Is this unique to Massachusetts? Is this what it looks like elsewhere? Is this a Massachusetts problem?
There is a national housing shortage, absolutely, that's driving a national housing affordability conversation. We've seen legislation pass in Washington, both in the Senate and just recently in the House, to address the housing affordability and supply issue. But I think it's pretty severe relative to other states here in Massachusetts. There was just some data in the last couple weeks looking at the National Permitting Survey that showed Massachusetts is now 50th per capita in housing production. Per person, we are building fewer homes than any other state in the nation.
And those homes themselves are so much more expensive too, depending on where you are in Massachusetts. So I think Greater Boston, or Boston specifically, it's always in the top 3, but I think right now it's the 3rd most expensive metro housing market in the entire country based on single family home prices. $800,000 is the average single family home price in the Greater Boston area. So good luck.
So, what are the conditions? Presumably, some of this is that if Massachusetts is an outlier, I would assume that there are some factors here that are unique to Massachusetts that are playing into why this is happening. I mean, what are some of the things that are unique to the Massachusetts housing market that is making it difficult to build more housing or keep up with demand? What's happening?
I think there's a couple things. Well, there's a lot of things. It probably would take more than 20 minutes to cover all of them. But I think some of the most significant challenges are the way we regulate land use and permitting of new home construction here in Massachusetts.
What's different about it?
351 cities and towns, all of which have their own individual development, approval, and permitting processes, making decision often through town meeting form of government, which is very unique to Massachusetts and New England that other states don't have, which creates a significantly higher barrier to pass certain types of local reforms that will allow more reasonably priced homes to be built. One of those challenges, I would say, is the way we regulate the size of lots that you can build new homes on in Massachusetts.
Okay.
We are among the top 3rd among all states in terms of large average lot sizes. So in order to build a home in Massachusetts, you often need a lot that's equivalent to the field at Gillette Stadium with the end zones cut off. We have towns that require 1, 2, or in some cases even 3 acres to build a single home on.
Is that just hanging on from history when lot sizes were
not necessarily
bigger, or is that intentional?
No, because if you look at a lot of our cities and our older cities, from Boston to Springfield to Pittsfield, to Lowell, etc., you see a lot more smaller, sort of compact lot sizes with smaller homes that were built on them. This is also historically when we think of the building of new homes after World War II and sort of the building boom, the suburban expansion. Those were not large McMansion style homes.
No.
Those were more modestly sized homes on 5,000-6,000 square foot lots. Over the years, for a variety of reasons, we have regulated up the minimum lot size.
So this is not a holdover from history. This is a fairly recent development.
This is fairly recent, and it means that we get these incredibly large, either new McMansions or tear downs of more moderately sized homes and replaced with much larger ones that are not affordable for working people.
And to kind of put a bit of a point on that too, what Jesse's talking about when he's talking about the way that the government actually works or doesn't work here, we're what's called a home rule state, and anyone that pays any attention to Massachusetts politics immediately broke into hives when I said that there.
Indeed.
Because there are some things that are basically completely left to cities and towns by sort of habit at this point, where, a city or town, it doesn't exist on its own. It exists because the state created it, and therefore the state decides what powers it has. But zoning is one of these powers that cities and towns have gotten very, very comfortable having pretty much entire dominion over. So when the state comes in and says, hey guys, we're going to allow accessory dwelling units, these little tiny units, as of right anywhere there's single family housing, or you have to do more zoning near MBTA communities areas, you suddenly see this real roar of defensiveness out of these cities and towns because they're like, that's our choice, not yours.
Well, let's get into those two things that you just mentioned right now a little bit more. You have the MBTA Communities Act, which was passed, I think, in 2021 under Charlie Baker. So we're 5 years into that. We've got compliance or mostly compliance from most of those communities. This is basically the state coming in and saying, like, hey, if the T is running in and around your town, you've got to zone in a certain way to allow for enough housing near MBTA stops. Is it making a difference? Has it made a difference?
Yeah, there are about 8,000 homes that are in the development pipeline right now in MBTA communities districts that otherwise wouldn't be.
Okay.
were it not for those
Is
communities.
8,000 a lot?
It's something. It's a beginning of what we need to do in terms of creating the opportunity for more homes to be constructed near transit and other areas under this law. It's not enough. I think there's a lot of other conversations we need to have. Certainly, when the legislature passed and Governor Healey signed the Affordable Homes Act, as Jennifer alluded to, we legalized accessory dwelling units as of right across Massachusetts, these backyard cottages. But there is more that needs to be done. And there's legislation that's on Beacon Hill right now that the legislature could take and move forward to continue that. And they have done some things this session.
Real quick, when we say ADUs, can we talk a little bit about what they are? And when we say as of right or as of right, just describe what that means in terms of zoning and in terms of what we're talking about and how this may or may not ease the housing crisis.
Sure. So as of right is sometimes easiest to talk about compared to what it isn't. If you have to kind of go through the process of building anything that does not exactly comply with the exact zoning that you have in your area, you have to go to whatever the local zoning board is usually. You have to say, hey, my porch is going to push 3 feet closer to the side of the street, and so I need this board to basically say that I can do that. Now, making something as of right means you can build
You don't got to
it.
ask anybody.
You don't have to do it. And in this case, if you're thinking about an accessory dwelling unit, which is kind of a smaller footprint building, usually detached, that means these are sometimes called granny flats or in-law units. The
Yeah.
idea of, if you love your mother-in-law and she's getting old and you want her in your backyard.
But you don't love her that
You
much
don't
that
love
you
her
want her in
enough
the
to
house.
have her like with that direct connection.
mostly
could
love
build
her?
that. Exactly. And if you mostly love her enough, if it's a single family zone district in Massachusetts, you can, if you can find the financing for it, you can build that unit.
And to be clear, as of right doesn't mean you don't need building inspections or meet fire code.
Right.
You still have to have the town ensure that it's meeting all the various
It's not an
requirements.
illegal shack.
Yeah, you can't just buy a shack at Home Depot and put it in your
Right.
backyard and call it an ADU.
All right, you're listening to the Curiosity Desk. We're talking with Jesse Kanson-Benanav from Abundant Housing Mass and Jennifer Smith from the CommonWealth Beacon about the state of. I want to zero in a little bit now on first-time home buying. I mean, is it how big of a problem is it that it seems like there's not a lot of first-time home buying going on in particular? How does that impact or not impact the overall market?
Well, it's really, really grim just in terms of the actual scale of it here. And to, really delight everybody with some numbers here, when we're talking about how bad it is, because we're talking about a market people are trying to break into.
Yeah.
Across the state of Massachusetts, we're talking about a homeownership vacancy rate of like sometimes less than 1%. And what a healthy one looks like is 2%. So basically saying you want about 2% of all of the homes that you could buy in Massachusetts to be available to buy. And so if you're getting half of that, less than half of that, it means that if you're a first-time home buyer, you've gone through these mortgage courses, you've been kind of walked through what all the legal processes is to buy a house, and you walk out there and you expect that there are going to be a few different options, maybe at some kind of tricky price points, but at least options. What people are finding is those aren't there, and that leaves them stuck in a rental market that is also really squeezed. So it
Yeah.
actually creates this knock-on effect.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that, it's not just about first-time home buyers.
Yeah.
It's also about seniors, the elders in our communities, some of whom are living in larger single-family homes or other types of homes that they raise their children in. Now that they're empty nesters, they don't want or need as much space. Maybe they don't want to have to maintain a larger building like that, but they want to remain in their community because there haven't been more of these sort of moderately sized starter homes built for them. They're remaining in larger homes that maybe are more appropriate for a family to live in these days. And it's just a continuation of that knock-on effect that Jennifer mentioned. So really it hits multiple ends of the age spectrum.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the things standing in the way. So we have a text here. Somebody says parking is ridiculous in East Boston, so that's why I see people resisting any new buildings going up. So there's a parking issue, right? There's potentially the issue from the builder side where they say, like, given how difficult or expensive it is to build here in Massachusetts, the numbers just don't add up in building smaller homes. As there's another example. And then there's as you point out, you've got all of these different cities and towns doing town meeting, a variety of reasons why people might not want more housing in their town. It could be them protecting their own, their own investment if they're thinking about the home that they're living in as an investment, or it could just be as simple as maybe resistance to change. So what's standing in the way here? Is it all of that and more? Like how do we move forward?
Yeah, I think that, I take the comment from the texter seriously. I think there's a very different situation with regards to parking availability in East Boston, let's say, than in, I don't know, Weston or somewhere like that. Certainly unique challenges here in the city. I think there's a variety of factors at play into just why so many communities are finding it so difficult to build more homes. And one of them is that when you've moved into a community and you have a perception of what you like about it, and there is this sense that something about what you like is going to change, I think that's a very normal human reaction to be resistant to that. But we have to recognize who is being impacted here. It is our families, it's our friends, it's our parents. We see constantly about the drove of young people that are leaving the state. Our future vibrancy as a Commonwealth is at stake here. So hopefully we can use that as opportunity to come together and continue to work for solutions that work both in the context of an East Boston as well as a Weston or further afield.
I mean, how big of an impact is that, like, sort of collective resistance to change? Is that like a major factor in your estimation?
Well, one of the things, it's not necessarily just kind of resistance to change as people who kind of are objecting would describe it. The one thing that everybody would say is like, well, no, I moved into this area because I like the things about it. And so if that changes, then there's something kind of fundamentally different about my experience. I was a local reporter in Dorchester for kind of the early part of my career. And the thing that was so odd to me, kind of covering these civic meetings so often, was parents who were saying there's nowhere for my 24-year-old to live near me. And I'm certainly not retiring or dying anytime soon. I don't have a house to leave them. And yet there's nowhere for them to live. But then you see this disconnect where they also don't really realize that they're also objecting to the same policies and the same developments that are kind of tailored for the 24-year-old who doesn't need, 3 bedrooms to live there.
We also have a system where decisions at the local level are often made based on who shows up to give public opinion on variances for new development or implementing MBTA communities or whatever the issue is before a local body. There are the researchers, Katie Einstein, Max Palmer, and David Glick at Boston University, who did great research, maybe now about 10 years ago, called Neighborhood Defenders, where they looked at public meetings in the 100 cities and towns around Greater Boston, dug into the meeting minutes, compared them to voter rolls, tried to create a picture of who is participating in Greater Boston in decision-making about new housing, and found that disproportionately those who are showing up and participating are wealthier, whiter, slightly more male than the region
Overall
as a whole,
population,
and also tend to be opposed to new housing creation in their community. So there's a conversation to be had about that entire process and how we can be more representative, think about needs of people who can't show up, as well as make sure we're thinking into the future and not just about the concerns of people who are able to access housing today.
Go ahead.
And maybe one of the things to keep in mind as well is Massachusetts is very homeowner heavy. Most people in Massachusetts are homeowners. The vast majority of legislators are also homeowners. There's been some good reporting from the Globe on basically, renters being represented in the legislature. And those, of course, are the folks who are then in charge of changing that zoning policy or encouraging that change. So bearing in mind that you have a really deep kind of entrenchment of all of the things that benefit homeownership, then creates this really odd paradox when you suddenly are in a situation where most people aren't able to then become homeowners.
Right. People I mean, houses are being bought and sold. Those who is buying and selling? The too few houses, I guess, that are being bought and sold.
Well, I mean, the most of it comes down to kind of the math of the down payment there. So if you're thinking about that $800,000 house average in Greater Boston, well, if you don't have some sort of federal assistance, if you don't have, a low income mortgage option that's available to you, it's whoever has 20% of that to just throw down. And so that's kind of increasingly what we're seeing in terms of these prices sort of being jacked up over time. And it's also why you see more focus, at least on the state policy side, to say, well, let's try and kind of close that gap when it comes to the people who just don't have $100,000 to throw at this.
So what is a first-time prospective buyer to do? What ought they do? I mean, what are the options available for somebody right now who wants to stay in Massachusetts, wants to buy a house, and wants to try to do something?
Look, I'm not a realtor, so I'm not going to have the best advice for them. But I think the reality is you gotta expand your geographic scope that you're looking at. I mean, if you've been living here in Brighton, where we're sitting for a lot of your 20s, and you all of a sudden want to gain enter homeownership, depending on what your job is, most likely you're not going to be able to do that right here in Brighton or in the immediate surrounding Boston neighborhoods. You got to look up at the North Shore. You got to look at the South Shore. There's you got to expand the scope and be willing to accept some trade-offs, I think, in location.
And also, the whole adage of go west, young man, doesn't really work that well here in this situation. The further west you go, those rates are really low too. You sometimes have even worse rates of vacancies for homeownership properties out in Western Mass. So again, kind of the coastal side of Massachusetts is both already denser, but it also kind of, because of that, has slightly more housing available to it. And also you then end up with better connection to kind of the commuter rail system if you don't have access to kind of the core MBTA. And I think that leads to a really big trade-off when you're thinking about making that transit move, which is its proximity to work, its proximity to family, its proximity to kind of like an urban center, if that's what you want to do. If you don't want to leave the city, you better be in a place where there is good connection to get to that city. And that becomes harder and harder to do the further out you get.
And I would add, this is not really answering the question for that person
That's okay.
looking for homeownership.
You look passionate to
there
add something.
is more that needs to be done on Beacon Hill. There is a variety of legislation sitting before both the House and the Senate. We have a couple months left in this legislative session. And I hope that folks who experience the housing crisis in the state and the severe housing shortage will call up their state reps, call up their senators, and tell them, we need you to do more.
Do you think that makes a difference?
I do think it does. I think that elected officials on Beacon Hill tend to hear more from the folks who are the most vocal in their communities, which we've already established are those that tend to be opposed to some of these changes. And so if they start hearing more from folks who are living through the severe housing shortage, are the ones that are victims of cutthroat competition, tell them it's time for Beacon Hill to continue doing more on housing, I think that will make a difference, and that will bubble up to legislative leadership, who has a lot of power over what gets done in this remaining month of the session.
All right. I said we had about 20 minutes. Would you say we solved it? Did we do it?
I think we solved it as long as, you make $160,000 a year.
At least.